The image that won't leave me is a white silk scarf half buried in desert sand. It was twisted into the brittle roots of a sagebrush 40 miles outside Las Vegas, the fabric sun-bleached and stiff. A fragment of perfume still clung to it, sweet, expensive, almost defiant against the dry wind. That scarf was the only trace of a girl whose name most people have already forgotten. But I can still see it snapping softly in the wind like a ghost refusing to let go. Before I go any further, let me know where you're listening from and share this if you believe remembering is the first step toward justice. Back in early 2024, life in Phoenix felt predictable in the best way. Morning started with the hum of my old coffee maker and the faint crackle of the AM radio in the kitchen. My neighborhood sat quiet beneath the soft rustle of palm fronds and the low murmur of traffic heading east on the I-10. After 30 years of chasing stories across state lines, I'd promised myself to slow down. Maybe write a book, take fewer flights, spend more time at home. But stories have a way of finding you even when you think you've closed the door. The first call came from Monica Salt, a name I hadn't heard in years. She used to work with scouting agencies in LA, booking bright-eyed girls for catalog shoots and music videos. Her voice over the phone trembled, not the kind of nervousness you hear from someone with gossip, but the strain of someone who's been carrying something too long. 3 of my girls are gone. Andy, she said. They all had the same offer, same wording, same contact number. At first it didn't sound extraordinary. Models skip contracts, chase better ones, sometimes disappear for weeks. But Monica wasn't the panicking type. She told me each girl had received a message from a so-called executive coordinator promising an all-expenses-paid shoot in Las Vegas private resort celebrity clients $5,000 for 2 days' work. I jotted down names as she spoke. Lauren Stewart from Seattle, Ashley Moore from Denver, Claire Hill from Austin. I didn't know it then, but those names would fill the pages of my notebook for months. When I drove through Vegas later that month, the city looked as it always did, restless, beautiful, and indifferent. The Strip shimmered under a pale sun. Tourists poured out of casinos holding plastic cups, laughter spilling across the asphalt. The desert beyond looked clean and endless, a hard contrast to the noise and color of downtown. If you stood still long enough, you could almost forget how close danger hides to luxury here. I met Monica at a diner off Tropicana Avenue. She had a binder full of printouts, flight records, social media posts, texts from recruiters who vanished after the deals were struck. Each page carried a timeline that stopped abruptly. They all sent photos from the airport, she said. Then nothing. Her eyes were swollen from sleepless nights, but her voice stayed even. I can't shake the feeling that someone's collecting them. The word collecting lodged itself deep in my mind. For weeks I tried to find ordinary explanations. Maybe the jobs fell through. Maybe the girls stayed on for parties, went off-grid for work. But the silence kept thickening around them, swallowing every trace of their lives. The agencies they named didn't exist. The contact numbers rerouted through dummy accounts. By February, the unease had settled in my bones. Every time I checked my inbox, another message came in, sometimes from a family member, sometimes an anonymous source. One email contained a single sentence. Look up the name Orion. No signature, no context. At first I ignored it. I'd seen too many crank theories. But when I mentioned the message to Monica, her face went pale. She said one of the missing girls had used that same word Orion in a text days before she vanished. That night, I sat in my home office scrolling through a maze of forums and encrypted posts. The name Orion popped up again and again, whispered in connection with a secret society operating out of private villas in the desert, hidden behind fashion contracts and invitation-only events. Most posts were nonsense, half urban myth, half moral panic, but the pattern was unmistakable. Recruiters, luxurious promises, women vanishing after contact. I remember leaning back in my chair, the hum of the ceiling fan above me, feeling that old reporter's instinct stir, the one that starts in your gut, not your mind. Something was wrong here, and it wasn't just a string of bad luck. In those days, my office window overlooked the quiet street behind my house. Around midnight, porch lights would click off one by one until only the orange glow of the street lamp remained. Sometimes I'd step outside, breathe the cool desert air, and listen to the far-off buzz of traffic. Arizona nights can feel endless, open, peaceful, but that peace carries its own kind of weight when you're thinking about people who've disappeared into a world that won't acknowledge them. Monica kept calling her updates shrinking each time. Still no word she'd say. Her phone's dead. Her account's gone. I tried to reassure her, but it felt hollow. I'd covered enough trafficking cases to know how quickly time closes doors. Every day without contact meant another layer of dust settling over the truth. In early March, I got a voicemail from a blocked number. A young woman's voice, thin with fear. "They're not who they say they are. Please don't." Then static. No name, no callback. Just those few words crackling through my speaker, followed by silence. I replayed it dozens of times, listening for background noise music, an accent, anything, but all I could hear was the wind. It sounded like the desert. That same week, Las Vegas temperatures hit the low 70s. Tour buses rolled down Las Vegas Boulevard. The news ran features about record tourism. Everything looked normal from the outside. But behind that normalcy, something was taking shape, quietly, methodically. And I couldn't shake the thought that somewhere in those miles of glitter and dust, a door had closed behind those girls that no one was willing to open again. One evening in late March, I drove past the old airfield at the city's edge where the horizon stretches flat and orange before the night swallows it. My phone buzzed once, an unknown number, no message. I waited for the second ring that never came. Out past the headlights, the desert looked calm, almost holy in the fading light. But I knew better. Somewhere out there, beneath all that silence, the first traces of something monstrous were already beginning to move. I still remember the way the desert smelled that night, dust and engine oil, the faint sweetness of creosote carried on the wind. I was parked on the shoulder of a frontage road outside Henderson, staring at the glow of the city a few miles off, wondering if the silence meant the story had died or if something worse was keeping it quiet. That's when Monica called again. Her voice cracked halfway through my name, the same way it had weeks before, but this time she didn't sound frantic, she sounded empty. Another girl had gone missing. Her name was Elaine Blair, 23, from Minnesota. She'd flown out on a modeling contract and stopped texting her sister 2 days after she landed. The last message said she was headed to an exclusive Orion event that promised life-changing exposure. Monica's voice trembled when she said the word Orion, like she didn't want to give it power by saying it out loud. After that call, something in me shifted. Up until then, I'd been working the edges, cross-checking names, looking for patterns, telling myself maybe this was just another series of scams. But now I knew the pattern wasn't stopping. These girls weren't just vanishing, they were being fed into something organized, something with rules. I drove back into town and checked into a cheap motel on the south side, the kind of place where the wallpaper smells like cigarettes and old air conditioning. I spread everything I had across the bed, printouts of flight records, photocopies of missing person notices, screenshots of private messages Monica had managed to recover. The girls all fit the same narrow frame, early 20s, camera ready, all contacted by the same recruiter using different names but the same language. Elite client confidential shoot, no outside communication until the job's done. The wording felt rehearsed, almost ceremonial. Around midnight, I opened my laptop and typed Orion modeling event into a search engine. The first few results were Fluff Astrology Club's local bars, one defunct talent agency. But buried on the 5th page was a post on a private forum, Stars of Orion Invitation, Only Old Rituals under new names. It was dated 3 years earlier. The user had deleted their account, but the comment thread was still visible. People traded stories about a secret group that hosted spiritual experiences for wealthy guests in Dubai and the U.S. rituals involving art, beauty, and sacrifice. Most of the replies mocked it as tabloid nonsense. I wanted to believe that too, but I'd seen too many coincidences line up to still call them random. I called an old contact in law enforcement, a guy named Ron Fields, who used to handle trafficking cases before he retired. I told him about the missing women, the fake contracts, the coded messages. He listened quietly, then sighed. "Andy," he said, "you're talking about something people don't want to exist. And in places like Vegas or Dubai, money can bury a body faster than the desert." He gave me the number of a friend who worked consular security, someone who might confirm if any foreign nationals had filed reports. When I called, the man on the other end spoke in clipped tones. He said there were rumors, yes, mostly whispers from embassy staff about models who showed up bruised or incoherent, claiming to have been held at parties that turned violent. None of them wanted to sign official statements. They disappear again, he said, either home or somewhere else. We're told to let it go. Over the next week, I tracked Elaine's trail across flight manifests and social media check-ins. Her last post was a photo of a champagne flute against a skyline captioned, "New City, New Start." 2 hours later, her phone went dark. Her sister sent me screenshots of their messages, and one phrase caught my eye. "They said I can't post anything until the event is over. It's like a secret club." The words mirrored those from the other victims. By then, even Monica had stopped pretending this was coincidence. She looked exhausted when I met her again. Dark circles under her eyes' hair pulled into a careless knot. She slid a USB drive across the table. "You should see this," she said. Inside were snippets of online chatter, encrypted posts, fragments of dark web listings. One mentioned Orion offerings priced in cryptocurrency. Another referenced recordings for collectors. I'd seen enough dark corners of the internet to recognize the tone, men hiding behind euphemisms to mask cruelty. But what unsettled me most was that these listings seemed to come from multiple accounts tied to the same region code, Nevada, and the UAE. It meant the pipeline was international. Someone was coordinating it. I remember feeling the room go still, like the air itself recoiled. Then came the first survivor. She reached out to me through a proxy account. No name, no location, just a trembling voice memo. She said she'd been recruited for a luxury party in the desert, told to bring no phone, no identification. She described being driven out at night, blindfolded, into a villa surrounded by sand. The windows were boarded. The air smelled of incense and chlorine. Inside, she said, there were people in black robes chanting in a language she didn't understand. She talked about hearing screams behind closed doors, about a symbol drawn in ash across her collarbone. She escaped by pretending to faint, slipping away when the guards moved someone else. The last thing she said before the message cut out was, "They call themselves the Stars of Orion. Don't let them find me." When I played that message back, my hands shook. Not because of what she said, but because of how she said it. Quiet, detached, the way people sound when their minds have detached from what they've seen. I forwarded the recording to Ron, who told me to keep it off the record. If what she's describing is real, he said, you're poking at something international. You won't win that fight alone. But I couldn't stop. I started piecing together the geography. Most of the victims' last known movements centered around one particular stretch of highway outside the city near a cluster of private villas rented year-round by shell companies. I drove out there one afternoon in late April. The sun was high, the heat shimmered off the road, and the mountains in the distance looked like they'd been carved out of smoke. I pulled off near one of the property's white stucco walls, mirrored windows, no sign of life. There was a faint hum in the air, the sound of generators. Through the gate, I saw what looked like a drained pool, and something painted faintly on the concrete floor, 3 concentric circles and a line cutting through them like a compass needle. When I tried to get closer, a black SUV came down the drive. 2 men inside, both in plain clothes, both staring straight at me. They didn't roll down the window or flash a badge. They just stopped until I turned my car around and left. I didn't look back, but I could feel their eyes in my rearview mirror for miles. That night, I got another anonymous message. It said, "Stop digging, or you'll end up in the photos too." I read it twice, then closed my laptop. For a long time, I sat in the dark, listening to the hum of the mini-fridge and the soft buzz of the motel sign outside. I'd been threatened before, but this one felt different. It wasn't angry, it was certain. Still, I couldn't walk away. When I reached out to Elaine's sister again, she told me something that tightened everything into focus. Elaine had mentioned a man named Samir who claimed to represent a brand called Desert Vision. The number he gave her traced back to a disposable phone purchased in Los Angeles. That same alias Samir appeared in messages to at least 2 other missing women. Whoever he was part of the machinery pulling these girls in. I sent the evidence to an overseas contact, someone who monitored trafficking networks. A few days later, she confirmed that similar recruitment tactics had surfaced in Europe months earlier. Same language, same promises, same sudden disappearances. She called it a feeder system, one designed to keep supply steady, while the names and faces changed. They hide behind myth, she said. That's what makes it work. By May, the story was beginning to slip beyond me. Too many rumors, too many moving parts. Every time I tried to verify one piece, another would fall apart. Yet the pattern held. Each disappearance fit into the next like a puzzle cut by someone patient and cruel. And still the world kept spinning. The strip stayed loud. The sun kept baking the sand into glass. Sometimes I'd drive out past the city limits and pull over just to listen. At night, the desert is almost silent except for the low whine of power lines and the occasional bark of a coyote. I'd stand there and think about all those girls, Lauren Ashley, Claire Elaine faces, once bright with promise, now folded into a rumor people scroll past online. I thought about the scarf I found half buried in the sand and wondered if she'd fought to hold on to it, or if it had just slipped free in the chaos. The last thing I remember from that stretch of time was a single call that came in just before dawn. A blocked number again. A woman whispered, "You're close, but they're watching." Then the line went dead. The sun came up over the horizon a few minutes later, washing the desert gold. The city below flickered back to life, casinos humming, tourists spilling back into the streets. But all I could think about was that voice and the way she said they're watching. It wasn't a warning, it was a promise. And in that moment, I realized this story had already moved beyond what I could see. Something bigger was unfolding, hidden just beneath the desert's calm surface, waiting for the next name to vanish into silence. The morning after that call, I woke to a thin layer of desert dust coating my car, and a sense I couldn't quite name, something between dread and obligation. I'd been a reporter long enough to know when a story was about to turn, when it starts reaching back toward you instead of the other way around. I packed my notes, drove into town, and rented a small workspace off Fremont Street, a windowless office that smelled faintly of cigarette ash and mildew. That room became my anchor, a place to sort through the fragments of what I'd found. The messages from missing women, the survivor's voice memo, the name Orion scrawled in 6 posts across obscure corners of the web. Every trail I followed led to silence. And yet I couldn't shake the feeling that someone somewhere was watching the way I was watching them. By June, stories started surfacing online. They came from anonymous accounts, most deleted within hours. Each described the same thing: private villas outside the city, where young women were brought under the guise of exclusive parties or fashion events. There was talk of black robes chanting cameras. Some posts claimed the rituals were filmed and sold on hidden sites, Others said they were nothing but urban myth. But then I got word from a fellow journalist overseas, Joyce Harris, an Australian freelancer who said she'd interviewed a woman who'd escaped one of those villas alive. Her name was also Joyce. For a moment I thought she was joking, but her tone told me otherwise. "You need to hear what she saw," she said, "because it matches everything you've written about." A few days later, the survivor agreed to talk to me directly. We met through an encrypted call. Her voice was thin, quiet, trembling. She told me she'd flown to Las Vegas for a private brand event last spring. The recruiter had promised luxury, a chance to mingle with industry people, maybe even a contract abroad. Instead, she was driven at night to a walled compound outside the city. No signs, no neighbors, only the sound of wind whipping through the sand. Inside, she said the lights were low and the room smelled of incense. The women were told to change into ritual clothes, thin white dresses, and paint symbols on their skin. They said it was for purity, she whispered. She described hearing screams behind locked doors, the dull thud of music that wasn't music, and a voice reciting something in broken English about cleansing. She said she pretended to go along until she could slip something into a guard's drink and run. She made it to the highway, barefoot hailed a passing car, and didn't look back. I listened to her breathing between sentences, the kind of slow, careful breaths people take when they're reliving something they've tried to bury. When she finished, I asked if she could describe the men. They weren't just men, she said. There were women, too, dressed the same, like they believed it. That last sentence stayed with me, the conviction, the ritual, the belief. It wasn't random cruelty. It was faith twisted into something that made pain feel holy. After that call, I reached out to law enforcement again. The officer I spoke with sounded weary, like he'd heard it all before. "We've had reports of trafficking rings using cult imagery," he said. "But without names or locations, it's vapor. People want closure, not ghosts." He was right about that much. Ghosts don't make headlines. They linger in the spaces between facts, and that's where this story lived. I spent weeks combing through embassy contacts, cross-referencing missing persons, even following financial transactions from shell companies that owned property in both Nevada and the Emirates. There was a pattern: money wired in loops, companies dissolved overnight, new ones appearing under nearly identical names. It was a laundering system. I was sure of it, though I couldn't yet prove what was being bought or sold. One evening, while tracing one of those payments, I stumbled onto something that made my chest go cold. A document, a lease for one of the villas signed by a corporate director, listed only as Orion Holdings. The signature was illegible, but the initials matched those from the online post's SO Stars of Orion. That same week, another survivor surfaced, a young woman named Sienna Green who'd returned home to New York after escaping what she described as a ritual show. She agreed to speak on record, though only under a pseudonym. We met in a coffee shop downtown, her hands wrapped tight around a paper cup she never drank from. She was small, pale, with the kind of stare that makes you realize she's seeing something just beyond the present. She told me she'd been lured by a casting agent who promised a high-profile event. Everything looked legit, she said. Flights paid, contracts signed, NDAs. But the second night, things changed. She described being woken after midnight by men in black robes. They told her to put on a transparent dress, then led her into a room lit by red bulbs. In the center stood an altar made of polished stone symbols carved into its surface. There were cameras everywhere, she said. And the sound, it wasn't music. It was this deep vibration, like an engine humming through your chest. She said the leader began chanting in Arabic, then switched to English, calling the women creations for service. Sienna's hands shook when she described what came next: the violence, the humiliation, the drugs. They said the ritual would purify us, she whispered. But it felt like being erased. She'd escaped weeks later during what she believed was a transfer when rival groups clashed near the property. She broke her arm hitting the ground but managed to reach a nearby road. Locals helped her reach a clinic, but no one wanted to get involved. They said calling the police would make things worse, she told me. So I left. I could see the scars when she pushed up her sleeve, thin lines that ran like lightning down her arm, faint burns near her ribs. She said she hadn't shown anyone before. I asked if she'd considered legal action. She gave a small, hollow laugh. Against who? A ghost. When I got back to my office that night, I sat for a long time without turning on the light. I played back the recording of her voice, the pauses between sentences, the sound of a spoon tapping against her cup as she searched for words that didn't exist. Part of me wanted to stop there, write what I had handed over to someone braver or younger. But then I thought about Lauren Ashley. Claire, their families still calling, still hoping, and I knew I couldn't. A few days later, another survivor surfaced, this time from Australia. Kimberly George. Her story echoed Sienna's, but carried a darker edge. She spoke of being branded, literally burned with heated rods shaped like ancient symbols. She said the group believed they were cleansing impure women, that every scream was an offering. I remember feeling physically sick listening to her describe the sound of those rods hissing against skin. They didn't care about money, she said. They cared about control. I tried to piece their stories together like a map. Each villa, each accent, each pattern of scars. The evidence pointed toward something far more organized than a single cult house. It was an enterprise, a trade built on ritual and spectacle. They wrapped violence in mysticism, sold recordings as art to buyers who hid behind encrypted wallets. And through it all, the authorities stayed silent. When I pressed the embassy again, they told me the same thing: no proof, no jurisdiction. One official admitted quietly that there had been sensitive cases involving Western women in Dubai, but nothing on record. It was easier, safer to say nothing. I asked him what happened to the women who didn't make it home. He didn't answer. Not long after word spread online about a girl named Natalie West, 21, British, missing since summer. Friends said she'd posted a photo from the airport, smiling, captioned, "Hello, Dubai." 2 weeks later, someone on a dark web forum uploaded a collection of photos labeled "Sacrifice of the English Doll." I didn't want to believe it, but people who'd known her said the resemblance was undeniable. The files vanished within hours, replaced by fakes and spam. But that name, English Doll, stuck with me. It sounded ritualistic, deliberate. I kept digging, but the deeper I went, the harder it became to tell truth from rumor. Some days I'd find nothing but silence. Others I'd wake to a dozen messages from strangers claiming to know where the next ceremony would take place. Most were lies or traps. Still, I kept following because somewhere inside all that noise, I believed the real answers were buried. By late summer, the disappearances slowed. Either the group had gone underground or someone had told them to stop drawing attention. But the damage was done. The survivors I'd spoken with were scattered across continents, haunted and unheard. The families were exhausted, the embassies indifferent, and every trail I followed led to the same dead-end influence, money and fear. Sometimes late at night I'd drive back out toward the Desert Villas Park on the side of the road and just listen. The wind would sweep through the brush, and for a moment I'd hear something faint, music maybe, or just memory playing tricks. I'd think of that scarf I found months ago, still buried in the sand, and wonder how many more were out there scattered like breadcrumbs that no one wanted to follow. The last thing I wrote in my notebook that season was a single line. They call themselves servants of the Desert Colossus. It came from one of the encrypted messages, maybe nonsense, maybe the truth. Either way, it stayed under my skin. Because by then I understood that what we were dealing with wasn't just a cult or a crime ring, it was belief wrapped around brutality, a system that thrived in the spaces where no one dared to look. And somewhere in that silence, I knew another girl was already packing her bags, thinking she was heading toward opportunity, not knowing she was walking straight into the mouth of it. I still think about that night, the one when everything I'd been chasing finally cracked open. It wasn't loud or dramatic the way people imagine revelations happen. It was quiet, almost ceremonial, the kind of silence that hums right before lightning touches the ground. I was sitting in my car outside a small hotel near the airport waiting for a call that I wasn't sure would come. A contact overseas had promised to connect me with a woman who'd escaped the same network the others had described, someone who had seen the inside of the villas, who could point to faces, to rooms, to proof. When the phone finally lit up, the voice on the other end was faint, shaky, but steady enough to say, "I can tell you what they do there." Her name was Kimberly George, 22, from Sydney. The last entry on her passport was a flight to Dubai 3 months earlier. She spoke in fragments, her breathing uneven. She'd been recruited through a fake modeling agency. At first, everything was typical photo shoot champagne, the kind of shallow glamour that lures the young and hopeful. Then came an invitation to a private celebration outside the city. She said the car ride took nearly an hour through the dark, the city lights disappearing behind tinted glass. When the vehicle stopped, she was led into a house that didn't look like a house at all, more like a compound built for privacy, its walls high and smooth, its windows blacked out. She noticed cameras in the corners and guards in plain clothes, all carrying something under their jackets. Her voice cracked when she said, "They told me I was chosen for a cleansing ritual." I could hear her swallow hard before the next sentence. They said I'd been living in sin. What she described after that was the kind of horror that sits heavy in your chest, not because of gore or violence, but because of belief, the conviction of the people who hurt her, the order in their cruelty. She said they forced her to drink something bitter thick as syrup that made her feel lightheaded and slow. Then they stripped her painted symbols across her body and burned her skin with rods shaped like letters from a language she didn't understand. Every act, she said, was deliberate, rehearsed, ritualistic. They were praying, she told me. Praying while they hurt us. She said she lost consciousness more than once, woke up in a basement lined with concrete and dim lights that never turned off. Some of the girls didn't wake up at all. They said those ones were purified, she whispered. I let her talk until the silence stretched too long. When she finally spoke again, her voice had flattened to something that didn't sound human. They filmed everything, every scream, every movement. They said it was for the chosen. That word chosen echoed the same way it had in Sienna's story. Whatever this thing was, they believed in it, and they were selling that belief to people who paid to watch it. After the call, I sat for a long time in the dark, my hands gripping the steering wheel until the leather creaked. I felt sick, not just from what I'd heard, but from knowing that every official I'd spoken to so far would file it under rumor. I opened the window, let the desert air roll in dry and metallic, and watched the planes blink across the sky. Somewhere up there, someone was leaving this place behind. Kimberly never got that chance. The next day I called Monica. She didn't answer right away, but when she did, she sounded older, worn thin. "They're not going to help us, are they?" she asked. I didn't have to ask who they were. She meant the police, the embassies, the agencies, all the systems that keep the world spinning for people who can afford to look away. I told her about Kimberly's testimony. She went silent, then said, "It's not just Vegas or Dubai, Andy. It's wherever the money goes." She was right. I'd followed the financial trail long enough to know that what we were seeing wasn't a local crime. It was a business one that stretched across borders, protected by names no one dared to say out loud. A few days later, a message came through an encrypted account. The subject line read, "English doll." I almost deleted it thinking it was spam. But the first line stopped me cold. She was sacrificed in August. The photos are real. Attached were 3 image thumbnails. I didn't open them. I couldn't. But the metadata told me enough the upload location matched a district outside Dubai, the same area linked to 2 other missing women. The file names were numbered like pages in a catalog. I forwarded the message to an investigator I trusted overseas, then deleted it from my inbox. Some things don't need to be seen to be believed. After that, the world around the story started to bend. People I'd spoken with stopped answering calls. A few contacts blocked me altogether. When I visited one of the rental properties linked to the case, it was empty, scrubbed clean, smelling of bleach and air freshener. The landlord claimed not to know who'd stayed there. I walked through the rooms anyway. Bare walls, no furniture, only a faint discoloration on the concrete near what had been the living room. The mark was circular, like something heavy had sat there for a long time. I didn't take a photo. I just stood there feeling the weight of what had happened in that space and left before the sun went down. That night, the story broke again in a way none of us expected. A darknet forum one I'd been monitoring for months posted a thread titled "The Return of Orion." The post described a ceremony recent somewhere in the Gulf region. It included a list of initials, 8 of them, and a price tag for exclusive documentation. The comments filled fast with cryptic language as if the users spoke in code. One phrase repeated throughout Servants of the Desert Colossus. I'd seen those words before in Sienna's testimony carved into a pendant worn by the group's leader. I copied the post, archived it, and by morning, it was gone. Every trace deleted. Around that same time, I received another anonymous tip, a woman claiming to be a nurse at a private clinic in Dubai. She said a young patient had been brought in weeks earlier with severe injuries and burns matching ritual symbols. The girl's passport was Norwegian. Her name was Evelyn. According to the nurse, men in suits came for her in the night, signed discharge papers no one questioned, and took her away. "No one speaks about it," she wrote. "They pay too much to keep quiet." I tried to verify it, but the clinic's public records showed no such admission. Still, the story fit too perfectly with everything else. The timing, the methods, the secrecy. I called the nurse again, but she didn't pick up. The number disconnected 2 days later. By the end of that summer, I'd filled 3 notebooks, 2 hard drives, and half a wall with photographs and printouts, but I still had nothing anyone would call proof. The authorities dismissed me as a journalist chasing internet myths. My editor back home told me to take a break, clear my head. I couldn't. Every night I'd see those girls' faces in my mind, their smiles frozen in the same hopeful expressions from the photos they'd posted before leaving. I'd hear Kimberly's trembling voice saying, "They were praying." One evening, as the light faded over the desert, I drove out to the edge of town. The wind was picking up, carrying grit that stung my skin. I parked near the old airfield and looked out across the emptiness. Somewhere out there, maybe under those same stars, someone was still doing this. Maybe with new names, new victims, new disguises. I thought of Natalie West, the English doll, and wondered if anyone would ever find her body. Or if the desert had already claimed her the way it claims everything left too long without a witness. When I got home, there was one final message waiting in my inbox. No sender, no subject line, just a single sentence. "You've seen enough." For a moment, I stared at it, my finger hovering over delete. Then I closed the laptop, turned off the lights, and sat there listening to the refrigerator hum. I thought about how small that sound was compared to the silence those girls left behind. The next morning, I packed my bags. Not because I was quitting, but because I needed to go where the trail had begun to see if the whispers about Orion Holdings were real, if the people behind this still walked freely under the same sun as the rest of us. The plane ticket sat heavy in my pocket as I locked the door behind me. I didn't know then what I would find, only that I couldn't stop now. Outside, the air was dry and still. The first stars were starting to show through the haze. I looked up, and for a second I saw the constellation that had haunted every part of this story, the 3 bright points of Orion's belt cutting through the darkness. And for reasons I still can't explain, I felt something watching back. The flight to Dubai felt longer than any I'd taken before, not because of the distance, but because of what I carried with me. I wasn't a cop or a diplomat or anyone with the power to break doors open. I was just a man with too many notes, too many voices trapped in recordings, and too many names written in the margins of a notebook that smelled like coffee and fear. When the wheels touched down, I looked out at the desert stretching endlessly beyond the city, golden empty and somehow ancient. It struck me that all of this, the glass towers and neon lights, sat like a mirage on top of something much older, something that had learned to hide its secrets. Well, I met with a source 2 nights after I arrived, a man who worked maintenance for one of the villa compounds I'd traced. He looked nervous, eyes darting to every shadow in the cafe. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "They're gone," he said. "The people you're looking for. They left months ago, but others come new ones." He told me that the property had been sold twice, the company dissolved and renamed. He didn't know where the owners went, only that trucks came in the night to take everything furniture, electronics, even the tiles from the floors. He paused before adding, "They always clean with bleach. Always." After he left, I sat alone under the hum of a dying ceiling fan and realized that every lead, every thread I'd followed ended the same way: emptiness scrubbed clean. The world had moved on. The embassies had stopped returning calls. The journalists who once shared my outrage had found newer stories. Even Monica, who had carried this burden longer than anyone, had gone quiet. When I called her, she said she was done. "I can't keep living in their shadows," she told me. "It's like they took every girl and every piece of me that tried to find them." There was no anger in her voice, only exhaustion. I didn't try to talk her out of it. Some people have to let go to survive. A week later, I sat in a hotel room staring at the city from a high window. Below, everything pulsed with life: cars weaving through traffic, people laughing on balconies, lights rippling across mirrored towers. You could never tell looking at it that somewhere beneath all that shine was a graveyard without markers. I thought of Lauren Ashley, Claire Elaine, Natalie. Their names had become like coordinates in a map that led nowhere. Each one had left home chasing light and ended in darkness no one could measure. I'd come all this way hoping for answers, but what I found was quieter, heavier. The kind of truth that doesn't end with an arrest or a headline, just an understanding that some things aren't meant to be solved, only remembered. I turned over the last pages of my notes that night. The evidence was circumstantial, the witnesses scattered, and every trace of proof sat behind walls money could buy. Officially, the case never existed. There were no charges, no extraditions, no public reckoning. But justice, I learned, isn't always something that happens in courtrooms. Sometimes it lives in the small, stubborn acts of remembering the refusal to let the story die, to let those faces fade into myth. Before I flew home, I visited the edge of the desert where the villas once stood. The structures were gone, leveled into smooth dirt, as if the earth itself had swallowed them whole. I walked along the fence line, the wind sharp with sand, and noticed something half buried near a post, a shard of glass curved and smoky like part of a broken lens. I brushed the dirt off it and turned it over in my hand. It might have been nothing, just debris from construction, but in the sunlight it flashed once like a memory trying to surface. I left it there pressed into the ground because some remnants belonged to the place that made them. Back in the States, the world felt smaller. Reporters who'd once called for details now avoided the topic. Editors said it was too complicated, too far away, too unprovable. Sienna and Kimberly stayed in touch for a while, sending updates about therapy, small milestones. Sienna finally going outside without panic. Kimberly volunteering with a support group for trafficking victims. They didn't talk about what happened, not directly, but their voices carried something steady, something that sounded like endurance. I think that's the closest either of them will ever get to healing. As for me, I went back to work, though. It didn't feel the same. The noise of daily life emails, meetings, headlines felt like static after months of listening to whispers that never stopped. I tried to write the story down not as an exposé, but as a record for the people who'd been erased. Every sentence felt like a small act of defiance against forgetting. I knew most readers wouldn't finish it, that many would dismiss it as rumor, but that didn't matter. The truth has a way of living on in the quiet, long after the world stops paying attention. One afternoon, months later, I received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a photo, grainy, taken at night. It showed a stretch of desert and, faintly in the distance, a figure standing before a circle of light. The back of the photo had a single line written in shaky handwriting. "They still gather." I don't know if it was real or meant to taunt me. I never found who sent it, but it reminded me that stories like this don't end. They just go underground, waiting for another name, another body, another believer. Time softens everything eventually. People move cities, rebuild memories, fade around the edges. But there are moments that don't dull. Sometimes when I drive through the desert at dusk, the sky a deep red over the mountains, I still think about that scarf I found tangled in the sagebrush. I remember its scent, faint but human, the last trace of someone who should have made it home. And I think about how easily the world forgets, how even the worst things vanish once the cameras leave. Maybe that's why I keep telling this story. Because forgetting is another kind of violence. I don't know if the stars of Orion still exist, at least not in the form we once knew. Maybe they dissolved, or maybe they adapted, changed their names, moved their rituals somewhere new. But the idea behind them, the one that says beauty can be possessed and pain can be worshipped, that idea has never really left us. It lives in the places where money and secrecy meet, where people become objects, where cruelty hides behind luxury. That's the part that keeps me up at night, not what they did, but how easily the world let them do it. Every year now, Monica organizes a small memorial online. Just a list of names, no photos, no details, only the first and last initials of each woman known to have disappeared. She says it's safer that way. I share it when I can, and sometimes strangers leave messages underneath. A simple remembering her, or for the ones still missing. It's quiet, respectful, and it matters more than most people will ever realize. Because that's how memory survives, not in courts or headlines, but in the quiet corners where someone chooses to say a name out loud. There's no real ending to a story like this, only distance. The kind that grows between what we know and what we can prove, between the living and the lost. Sometimes I still hear their voices, Lauren laughing in a grainy video, Claire's nervous excitement before her flight, Kimberly whispering, "They were praying." I hear them, and I think about all the ways they trusted the world to be kind and how the world failed them. I don't say that out loud often. I just keep working. Keep remembering, because that's all that's left to do. If this story stayed with you, share it, not for views, not for noise, but so no one's name gets lost to the dark.